I was never enough, no matter what I did. I think the heart and soul of the gospel is Jesus, and Mormons, it's Jesus plus have you done all that you can do.
Welcome back to episode 3 of the Awakening series. If you missed episodes 1 and 2, make sure you check those out. I'll link them in the show notes. TeriLyn is a full-time influencer and savvy businesswoman. She is also one of the most generous and kind people that I've ever met. TeriLyn grew up in the Mormon Church and eventually transitioned out for several reasons, which you'll get to see in this video. TeriLyn is honest and vulnerable, and I know you'll appreciate her story.
Hi, I'm TeriLyn, and I live in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I'm so excited to share my story today. I grew up in Utah. I grew up in a small town outside of Salt Lake City. It's called Draper. It's no longer small. It's huge. There's so many people there. And I grew up with 5 older brothers and my parents, and we were raised Mormon. And my grandparents were Mormon and their grandparents. So my mom's grandparents, is that right? Came across the plains with the pioneers and helped settle in Salt Lake City. So really strong family history in the LDS Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the official name. And then my dad's parents actually immigrated with the Mormon Church from Scotland. And then they settled in Neola, Utah, which is 3 hours east of Salt Lake City. So my whole family is in Salt Lake City, or they were. There's some that have moved now. And I grew up there. And so grew up there, same house in elementary, middle, high school. I went to college at Brigham Young University and got a finance degree, graduated there. And then I started working at Goldman Sachs in Salt Lake City. A few years later, I moved to North Carolina, and that's where I've been for almost 15 years. So that's kind of the big picture of my life and how I ended up where I am. Growing up Mormon, I didn't know any different. Like most people that I grew up with were also Mormon, especially back then. I'm almost 40. Now Utah's, I think maybe 50% Mormon versus when I was growing up, it was probably 90%. So everybody shared the same values. Like I joke with my husband now that it would be great to raise Thomas in Utah, because one thing that I've noticed, and this isn't, I'm not trying to offend people, but I've noticed, like, one of the first things I noticed when I left Mormon Church and I moved out here is, like, people say they believe something, but they don't always live up to it. I mean, we're all guilty of that. Mormons really live up to what they believe. Like, they do not have premarital sex, far and away for the most part. They say they don't drink coffee. The vast majority do not drink coffee. Like, my parents have never tasted coffee. My parents have never tasted alcohol. So they have a lot of rules that I think they're kind of famous for, like no sex before marriage, certain like modesty standards, the way that you dress, coffee, alcohol, and they all live it. Versus when I moved out here, a lot of people are like, oh, well, so-and-so doesn't drink because they're Baptist or whatever. But then every Baptist I knew got drunk on the weekends, and like you might talk to this Baptist and they did it one way, and then you might talk to this type of Baptist and they did it another way. So it was all very individual versus, and so it felt very hypocritical to me coming from a church where, like, I'm getting hung up on sex for some reason, but like none of my friends had sex before marriage, not one. And I don't know any, like, I think most people outside of the Mormon Church do have sex before they're married, like even among Christians. So that was one thing that was really surprising to me, that is a contrast now, is we all had the same values. And so like I never saw alcohol in high school. Like the only time I saw alcohol was at a jazz game. But again, this was all pre-cell phones, like pre-smartphones. I'm sure that my nieces and nephews are now exposed to so much more than I was. But it was it's hard to like say what it was like growing up because it's all I knew. But looking back compared to the things I worry about now with my son, it was wholesome. Like I'd never heard the F word. Everybody is genuinely very, very kind, like the nicest people. That's one thing I miss, is like the tight-knit community, that like your neighbors are the same people you go to church with, are the same people you go to school with. And you just always have a really strong support network versus outside of the Mormon Church. I feel like you have to work really, really hard to build that and be intentional versus it being built in. I always tell people growing up, I was like super Mormon. Like I was not just like a casual outsider. Like I got all of the, I can't remember what they're called now, but like, and I'm sure they've changed the name, but there's like these awards or they're not awards. It's like an accomplishment, kind of like the guys get an Eagle Scout. There was the equivalent for young women where like every 2 years you're earning, this can drive me insane. This is how long it's been. Like I can picture the necklace. I still have it. Like you have to complete certain things to get this recognition, for lack of the correct term. And like I would get that. I was the leader of the Laurels. Like, so they had Beehive, My Maid, Laurel, depending on your age of young women. Like I was the Laurel president, I think. Like I got a scholarship to BYU, which you can't just be like a casual Mormon to get a scholarship to BYU. I was going to the temple regularly. I would get up at 4 a.m. and go to the temple before school. Like I was, and this was in high school, I was not a casual Mormon. I had no animosity towards it. I definitely was probably more of a rebel than some of my other friends that I viewed as like the perfect Mormons. But rebelling for me was like, I would make out with a guy or something. Like I never like, or I would wear a sleeveless shirt once in a while, or I might wear a tankini versus a full piece swimsuit. Like that was rebellion. And it wasn't until, I'm trying to remember the first time that I was like, I'm not sure this is for me. I know, so in college, like, and everybody at BYU was Mormon. I remember feeling like I guess in high school I did date one guy who wasn't Mormon. Like, probably one of my most serious boyfriends was not Mormon. And I think that was hard for my parents. I think they were confused. But then I also dated, like, the super Mormon guys. And then in college, everybody I hung out with was also LDS. So I think the first time I really not even wished I wasn't, but was curious, was I was working at Goldman Sachs, and one of the managing directors, which is a very senior position there, had just moved from New York to Salt Lake City to help with that office, and she was having a housewarming party, and I had never heard of a housewarming party in my life. Maybe people do them now, I don't know. In Utah, they didn't then, at least not in my circle. And she was having a housewarming party, and I really, really wanted to go. I just thought it was going to be so cool. And somehow I found out there was going to be wine there. And my husband at the time, he told me I couldn't go because there was going to be wine. And I just remember feeling like I was really sad. And I was also, I think I almost felt like ashamed that I was being held back from something that I wanted to do just because there was going to be wine there. It's not like I was going to go and get wasted. But that was the first time that I remember thinking that I wished my world was bigger. And I didn't go. And then when I would travel to New York for work, like I did my internship at Goldman when I was still in school. And I did like a 2-week stint in New York as part of that internship. And everybody was going out to bars and all of that. And I was 20, 21. How old was I? I don't know. I must have been old enough to go to bars, but I didn't go. And I felt so left out that like all these friends were going out in New York and they're going to bars and whatnot. And I just went back to the hotel room. And I wasn't even consciously like sad or upset. I just felt left out and more like, these are really good people. Like why... Nobody ever told me growing up that like if you're not Mormon, you're not a good person. But somewhere along the way, I became wary of people who were not LDS. Like I can think of a neighbor that I had growing up, and we had multiple neighbors around us, ironically, were not LDS. Like some of my dad's closest friends were not LDS. But there was one in particular that I knew drank beer. And like all growing up, I was like, oh, I need to be careful. Like he drinks beer. Like why I thought that? Because like there's like my cousins, I have cousins that drink beer like that were... I don't know where I got that hang up, but somewhere in me, I was wary of non-Mormons because I thought it was going to make me bad by association. So Goldman was kind of my first exposure to non-LDS people. And I think I was more curious. And then that eventually led to like tiptoeing out. Like I got invited to be a bridesmaid in one of my coworkers' weddings. It was in New York City. And she just wanted everybody to wear black, whatever they wanted. And I bought a dress with sleeves because that's like Mormons wear sleeves. Their shorts go to their knees. Like, and then there's a whole other subculture about modesty and immodesty. I think particularly with the rise of Instagram and like Mormon influencers and what they're wearing versus what like traditional Mormons wear. So anyway, I was invited to be a bridesmaid and I really wished I could have worn something else. Like I just felt not cute. And on that same trip, it was in August in New York City and it was so hot, and Mormons wear garments. So when you go through the temple, which females typically do before they get married or before you go on a mission, and I think more women go on missions now than when I was growing up. Only a couple of my friends did, but like 4 of my 5 brothers went on missions. All my guy friends went on missions. So if you're a male, you go through the temple before your mission and then you wear garments for the rest of your life. And they're very sacred. You wear them under your clothes all the time. That was also another like rebellion. Like I did not wear my garments when I worked out. Like I think I told myself that it was because it was disrespectful that I was getting them sweaty. But I think, like, in all honesty, I think I was just like, this is uncomfortable and I don't want to wear them when I'm training for a marathon. But I know plenty of people who work out with their garments. So circle back to New York. It was in August, super hot. I was wearing my garments under all my clothes and I was like, this is ridiculous. Like if garments had been created by somebody who lived in a humid environment, like maybe they would have been different versus the desert. And I went into a boutique in Soho and I bought a dress. I can still picture it. I wish I'd kept it because it was so pivotal to me. And it's so hard to explain why this is pivotal, but it really was. Like I bought a sleeveless dress. It was slightly above my knee. Like I'm really short. I'm 5'1", so it's not like my booty was hanging out. And I don't even remember like if I put my garments in the grocery bag or in the shopping bag, or if I like brought the dress back to the hotel and then changed there, but I wore that dress and I didn't wear my garments. And I posted a picture on my blog because I was blogging. I'd started blogging when I was in college. And I just got the most shameful comments. I wouldn't even say they were hateful. But just commenting that, like, I can't believe you were dressed that way. And it was just a sleeveless dress. What would your parents think? What would God think that you're posting this on the internet? I got like 10 of these comments within an hour. And I could look up the IP address. And it was people in Draper and Lehigh, like people I knew. And they were all anonymous. But I just felt so shamed by people. And I think they were probably more confused than anything, and they were probably trying to help maybe. Like I don't think that most people are malicious. I really don't. But it was just devastating to me. And I felt so betrayed that it made me kick harder. Like if like I think some people get shamed into submission, I think I get shamed and I fight. And I don't think I ever wore my garments again. I think I put them away. And like they were in my closet and I stopped wearing them. I'd never realized that that was such a turning point, but it was. Like that's absolutely what changed a lot. And after that point, I came home and I was living in North Carolina by then. I had my first taste of alcohol. It was a gin and tonic. Loved it. I remember going to Fresh Market and buying wine, being so worried that somebody was going to see me from my ward. I remember I did the what's it called? The Creeper Trail, where you ride bikes in Virginia. And there's a coffee shop along the way. And I really wanted coffee. It was fall. And I was like, this is what you do. So like the wedding was in August. This was just a couple months later. I'm like, coffee's so cozy in the fall. And I remember I thought it was so nasty, but I really wanted to finish it. And now I know it was nasty because I ordered black coffee with like a pump of pumpkin syrup and no milk. Like it was disgusting. Of course it was gross. Now I drink my coffee black. But that, it was those physical, tangible things and other people's reactions that I feel almost gave me the courage to lean in more. And I can't remember who it was that said it. Like when I had coffee, somebody was like, oh, that's the gateway drug. And it's so funny, but like they really meant it. And I mean, they're not wrong. Like I had coffee and then I started drinking alcohol, and then eventually like I left the Mormon Church. Like, so in a way it was, but it was kind of tiptoeing out of these rules, and it just stopped feeling true. And I would go to church, and in the Mormon Church, you're assigned a calling. So like at my church, like I can volunteer to be in the kids ministry. I can volunteer to be an usher. At the Mormon Church, you get a calling, and everybody has a calling. And it might be like you're the bishop and you oversee the entire ward, or it might be that you hand out programs. So my calling here was in nursery, and the nursery is 2 and under, and I absolutely hated it. Like, I did not like kids at the time. Like, it just was not what I enjoyed. And then I got put in, I think they're called Sunbeams. I loved Sunbeams. It's like 4 and 5-year-olds. They're so cute. And like they give you a lesson plan, so I would go and I would teach Sunbeams every week. And one of the parents must have seen my blog, and they went to the bishop and said that they were uncomfortable with me teaching their children. And so I was no longer allowed to teach these 4 and 5-year-olds by myself. I had to have my ex-husband in there, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I liked that time away from him for various reasons. And so again, I just felt so shamed. I got released from that calling, and I can't remember if I turned down the next calling or if I had a different calling where I didn't need to be there as often. I can't remember, but I just stopped going. And I was like, I'm just not going to go anymore. And one of my closest friends, I met her here. Her husband went to med school here. And we're still super close. And I remember her telling me, she's like, I don't care if you're Mormon, I care about you. And so many people would ask her why she was friends with me. They were concerned that I was a bad influence on her. And I mean, she was like I had no family here. And she stood by me no matter what, when everybody else just made me feel like such a bad person. And it's funny in some ways, but like I just felt like these people thought I was awful because I'd worn a sleeveless dress and I drank coffee. Like I was a bad person and I couldn't be around their kids. And so that's when I just stopped going to church. I left my husband, and that's a whole other story, but there had been a conversation of, I'm not going back to the church. Is this a deal breaker? And he said it was. And there were other factors that led to me leaving, but I left and I moved into this little house over by St. Leo's Catholic Church. It was like, I still love that neighborhood so much. There was a lot of broken people over there at the time. And I started going to St. Leo's Catholic Church, I think because I loved that I could walk there and I thought it was so beautiful. And I knew absolutely nothing about Catholicism, like nothing. And I would go, and I think I liked that it was the same every single week. Like going to sacrament meeting in the Mormon Church is not the same every week because there's different topics and different speakers, but it's the same structure. And I think I liked that there was that consistency. So I went to that off and on, I don't know, maybe for a year. And then I had a friend who was Methodist, and I went to church with her. I had a friend who was Presbyterian. I went to church with her. And I think those are the only ones that I went to before I moved to Charlotte. So when I moved to Charlotte, I went to a church that's very popular, and I absolutely hated it. It felt like people say that Mormonism's a cult. Like this church felt like a cult. Like it was real weird. Like it was so loud. They were handing out earplugs and people were like worshiping the pastor. It was very bizarre. Never went back. And then when I was dating my husband at the time. He was still in Winston. I was in Charlotte. And I ended up being here on the weekends quite a bit because all my friends were here and we were dating. And we started going to a church in High Point, the Summit Church. And I fell in love from the first time. It was still really weird to me that it was loud music and a band because Mormons have organ or piano. It just felt a little like a soft landing to kind of go back into church. And we were there. My husband and I went there the entire time we were dating. And then for the first few years of marriage, the pastor there married us. That church was a really, I think is what helped me find my way back to like pure Christianity. And I guess I've never thought much about like how impactful the Summit Church was, but it really was. Like it made a big difference in my life. And I think that they specifically cater to people who were new to church or maybe feeling a little lost. And I mean, they absolutely nailed it. And then the way that I found our current church, which is Two Cities, I was living downtown. So I guess it would have been Sunday. I'm not sure what day they had services. I would walk my dog downtown, and for like 2 or 3 weeks in a row, I talked to somebody at this welcome tent, and I wish I knew who it was. And it just seemed like the happiest group of people that I'd ever seen. And they gave me a flyer or handout or something. I probably still have it, and I kept it for years. And then I found it in my Bible. And we had been driving to High Point for church, and it was really hard to get involved because everybody there lived out there, and we didn't know a lot of people here that went there. And I was like, well, why don't we try this church in Winston? It's called Two Cities. And we went once, and I was like, this is our church. Like, this is our church. It just felt so pure and focused on the Bible. And it just doesn't pull any punches is like a good way to describe Two Cities. Like it's very like, there's things that I disagree with and there's things that like I leave and I'm annoyed at. And I think if you're not annoyed at your church and you're not frustrated by what you're learning, like you're not reading everything. You're not reading the whole Bible and you're not being challenged. And I've found some of the best friends I can imagine. And so we started going to Two Cities, and then like 3 months later, COVID hit. So we watched online, for a long time. And then we had my son, and now we're back. And I just, we talk a lot about leaving Winston and like moving to Boone or something where my husband's from. And it's the church and the community that is what, like, I just couldn't fathom leaving. I've read the Bible and the Book of Mormon my whole life, and it's like, which is which? And so it's hard to like, kind of pull out the things that aren't necessarily true. I think one thing that I really, really, really struggle with is the concept of grace. And I don't know if this is like actually in church doctrine or if like I just heard it somewhere growing up and it stuck with me. I don't know. But I know that it's been said a lot in the Mormon Church is we are saved by grace after all you can do. And I think that's why there's a culture of really high performance and excelling in the Mormon Church. Like I have friends who went to the Olympics. I have so many friends who are CEOs of major companies. Like they are an extremely successful group of people. Like I felt like a failure because I only got full ride on academics versus my friends that got full ride on academics and music, or full ride on academics and athletics. Like I only got full ride on one thing. So like, it's just a really, really high performance culture. And I think it's that after all you can do. Well, it's like, well, how much can you do? Like, if I'm not reading my Bible every single morning for at least 30 minutes, like, am I going to be saved by grace? Probably not. Like, If I'm not going to the temple once a week, if I can only go once a month, like, am I still going to be saved? No, that's not all I can do. I'm prioritizing running. Like, it just becomes this culture of anxiety, and you can probably hear it in my voice, especially if you're wired to like want to succeed anyway, like I am, that I was never enough, no matter what I did. But the concept of grace is hard for me because it's like, well, I believe, so I'm saved, which being saved is a term I'd never heard. And people are like, oh, she was saved. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? How do you know she was saved? Like, only the Lord can save. Like, we're not going to know in this lifetime if we're saved. Like, grace and being saved are completely foreign concepts to me. And so it's hard for me to wrap my head around. So I think where I'm at with my faith now is it's almost like I really, really want that solid 100% confidence, faith, assurance that I had growing up. Like, no doubt I believed everything. Like, I very much believed the Mormon Church. And I feel like I'm much more, I wouldn't say cynical, but it's so hard for me to have that feeling of like, yes, it's more of like, I really, really want that feeling. And I don't know if it's because I lost my faith once before that I'm a little bit guarded, I don't trust, or if it's just hard for me to wrap my head around that, like, yes, I am enough. Like, I believe, and that's enough. That's hard for me, is really believing that. Church I'm at now, which is why I like it so much, is like, we are in the Bible. We're not talking about rules that I need to follow to be doing all I can do. I think the heart and soul of the gospel is Jesus, and Mormons, it's Jesus plus have you done all that you can do. The weight and like the anxiety to perform is gone. And I wish that's what some of my friends and family knew, is that like, you don't have to be perfect. And I'm wired that way, but I do think there's just this high expectation on people. They're so busy and they have to do so much to feel like they're fulfilling their obligations, and the gospel is just so much simpler than that. Like, when I think about my faith now, I don't feel like this, like, it's like a physical feeling that when I think about being Mormon, it's like this pressure, like, right here, versus what I think about my faith now is just like, it's okay. Like, everything's gonna be okay.